The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with standards set by the Tennessee Department of Education. For more professional development videos, check out our website at www.mtsu.edu/CEM.
Welcome back. This is the School Counselors Collaborative at Middle Tennessee State University, and we're about to start our session called the Cross Collaborative. So, our focus here today, our audience here today, is a group of school counselors from about 15 districts in Tennessee. And so we're going to have this discussion now in this cross-collaborative session about how school counselors work with other roles in the school, specifically how school counselors work with teachers of English learners, and how school counselors may work with special education teachers to serve the children that may have needs in those overlapping areas. We've had specific requests for these kinds of sessions from, particularly from our teachers of English learners, to learn how we overlap in this work. And so Dr. Joe Gordon's going to join us again today, and he's going to facilitate one group. This is Andrew Rainey. Andrew Rainey is a teacher of English learners at Riverdale High School. And of course, Dr. Tiffany Wilson. So Andrew's going to give us some remarks. Dr. Gordon's going to step in a minute and talk a little bit about SPED. We don't have a representative from SPED today, but we're still going to have the conversation. Then we will break into the grade level groups, and I'll tell you what we'll do at that time. So Andrew, would you talk to us a minute?
As Dr. Clark said, my name is Andrew Rainey. I am a EL educator at Riverdale High School. I do some other work with Rutherford County Schools and Trevecca Nazarene University, and it's really a joy to be here. I've spent a lot of time with the EL Collaborative, and I was with y'all on Zoom in January with Miss Josie Cottrell, and it's fun to see some faces here that look like, I see the post-lunch kind of slump where we're all like, oh yes, I'm paying attention. I feel that. I was there last week. No, it's a joy to be with y'all. Counselors are some of my favorite people to work with at the school. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap with the way counselors interact with our teachers of ELs and our teachers of special education students. And one thing that I've noticed in my short career with counselors is that they always ask a lot of questions because they want to know, because they care. And that's one of the things that makes y'all my favorites in the building, is that y'all care and you really do want to know how to best serve the students. And so I'm really excited to hear what y'all have to say in some of your experiences today. Dr. Krog kind of asked Dr. Wilson and I to speak to some of the things that we hear a lot and we get a lot of questions about, whether undergrads we're working with or in our schools. Some of the things that I hear a lot from educators, or from counselors rather, are counselors asking about translation. That's a big thing. I see a few nods and some very vehement nods, yeah. I have a lot of counselors ask me about scheduling, especially my high school counselors ask me about scheduling a lot, and I see some nodding back there because they're like, oh yeah, it's fun, especially when you get those dual serve students. And the other big thing I think is counselors just wanting to understand how to best communicate with our students, not just translating, but how to best speak to them where they're at, not intimidate them, and make them know that the counseling office is a safe space for them. How many of y'all have noticed that a lot of the ELs would rather just gravitate toward the EL teacher's room? Yeah, I love them so much. So as an EL educator, a lot of what we want to do is help our students find other resources in the school. And I'm really thankful that you guys are here today and learning about how you can make yourself that space for ELs. Yeah.
Kind of being drafted in last minute. I'm happy to be drafted in to talk about special education. I don't want to take it for granted that my experience is everybody else's experience, but I was fortunate that the school that I started at and stayed at for 10 and a half years had an expectation that the school counselors were an active participant in the IEP process for all of our students to as much as possible. And what I tell a lot of people is oftentimes the communication with and the work of the school counselor is the first door that is open for students to get through the pipeline to the services that they need, whether it be EL, whether it be more specifically special education. And oftentimes I felt like the importance of our role from a general aspect is students who are needing those services, there is an emotional aspect to it for the student, oftentimes for their parents as well. So like when we were talking about earlier, being with and walking with parents through that process, because even though that we know that participation in special education is different than it was when we were growing up and going to school, there are still stigmas that are attached to being identified as a student with a learning disability or with any other type of disability that requires an IEP. Also, participating in those processes, just from a practical and pragmatic aspect, is especially for special education, is for my high school counselors in the room, we know what those tracks are in progressions towards graduation, and I have seen from my role at the district level, students being put in a disadvantage when changes were made to a student's service structure that required a change in courses, which put a student off track for graduation. And that's one of the worst things that can happen for a student, whether it be EL or special education. We want to make sure that we're leaning into our expertise as counselor, but also consulting with our partners in EL and special education to make sure we are creating the right track and right path for those students. So as counselors, we have an integral role, and there's a necessity to have those relationships for sure.
Dr. Wilson, would you like to add anything to their remarks?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing for me as a former high school counselor is making sure that as school counselors, we understand that all students are our students. I think oftentimes school counselors, if it's an EL student, they'll push off on EL teachers. If it's a SPED student, they don't have anything to do with IEP meetings or 504, well, unless you're a 504 coordinator, but they're not participating in these IEP meetings, and I think that is such a disservice for our students. So my hope for this session is that we all walk away with some type of strategies that we can make sure that all of our students are all of our students, and that we take ownership of their time in the building. I think that is so critical.
So the conversations we're going to have in these small groups are going to be looking at two things. One, what has worked in your schools in this relationship among school counselors, teachers of English learners, and special education teachers? What things have been successful? What are some stories about children, students you've heard that we knew it worked, and we helped this student feel more successful and feel more validated because we worked together to do this. And the second thing I want to talk about is, what do you need help on? What are the barriers you're facing? What are the problems you're having that you'd like to have some ideas about how to handle it? So two things: what are the successes? And second, what are the barriers you still face? And remember, today we're specifically looking at how we serve English learners and how we serve children with IEPs and with special needs. And that's not even to mention the children who are not formally identified that have special needs, and they are in every school and in every grade. So those are the two lenses I want to put on this conversation today. What works because you've seen it work, and what do you need help on? Because from that conversation may come some future sessions in the School Counselors Collaborative. So Dr. Wilson's going to facilitate the middle school conversation, yes. Andrew is going to facilitate the high school conversation, and Dr. Gordon's going to facilitate the elementary conversation. I'm going to rotate and roam. So that's what we're doing. So give us some ideas, share with each other. Let's see what's working, and let's see what we need help with. All right, so let's do it.
if y'all don't mind, I'm going to sit down and be a part of the group today. I will admit, I have never been an elementary counselor, but I am thankful that my elementary counselors have adopted me in my role in helping them. But I guess maybe let's start off with the success stories that kind of get our brains, moving and thinking about our experiences with working with students, English language students, and students with disabilities. So, any unique stories or success stories that you would like to share in your experiences in working with those populations of students?
I know with our ESL students, we've got several teachers and they are all very in tune with their students, and whenever their students are having a problem, or if we get background from the parents that there's something going on at home, they will immediately turn around and let us know. And a lot of times what we have to do is, since the parents don't necessarily speak any English, we'll either have to use a translator in a call, or we can go on the Psychology Today and find a counselor that speaks their language.
Definitely, that language barrier, that language gap, it can be a difficult thing. I think that for most families, though, like putting in the effort and trying your best, a lot of the times our parents that don't speak the language, they want to participate, they want to be involved, they just may not know how. I think that's a big role that we can have as school counselors to help bridge that gap, but also having those teachers that create that environment where they are enmeshed with those students, and they will know those students and they will know those families better than we ever will as school counselors. So as far as like knowing what's going on with the kids, they're so invaluable. Other experiences?
We have a family resource liaison who speaks Spanish, which is our biggest need at our school, and she's with us 3 days a week, and our parents get very comfortable with her and talking to her. So she very often will come to me about students and the issues that they might be having.
Finding anybody and everybody that can speak the language and building those relationships with them to like you're going to be in on this conversation, let's make sure this is what confidentiality is. It's like when we're having these types of conversations, just keep this private. But yeah, having whomever it is, it could be a family resource liaison, it could be a teacher, it could be, I've had custodians that have helped me out, front office staff. That's one thing our district tries to do as much as possible, is hiring front office staff that can speak multiple languages. But that's difficult to do. It's difficult to find for sure.
We utilize Class Dojo as well, and I've found that when I share things on Class Dojo with the whole school, what I'll do is, if it's a picture or PDF, I will retype the text of the picture into the body of the message so that the parents can hit the translate button.
Yep.
Class Dojo does that. That's awesome.
And a lot of times I'll have if I've got a question for the parents, I'll have the teacher dojo the parents, because I don't have the direct link to the parents through my account, and so I'll have the teacher dojo the parent, and they'll be able to get an answer like that usually. So
absolutely.
One thing I do, that might change this year a little bit, but in the past 2 years, a lot of my tier 1 lessons have PowerPoints with them, and PowerPoint has a program where it will translate as you speak. And so most of the students who come, who are ESL students who don't speak any English, are Spanish speaking. And so even though it is not always correct and it goes really fast, I've noticed those students will start trying to read it and catch up, and so they know at least a little bit about what's going on, since I don't speak the language at all. And then usually there are students in the room who do speak the same language, and I'll make sure and comment, thank you for making sure that this new student can participate in class with us. Do they have any questions? And I don't necessarily want to put them on the spot and make them a spokesperson or anything. But a lot of them just kind of do it naturally, and I make sure give them attention for caring about their classmates and their ability to participate in school. But even just the effort, I've noticed like some kids will come back with another student who does speak English to tell me something or ask for some help, and they'll come in like partnerships every so often, so they get their point across clearly.
Those kids are so resilient. They have to be. They have to be, be ingenious in the way that they access, the systems and supports. And I think what you said about not forcing them to, or not putting the pressure on them to be the spokesperson or the advocate, and letting them know it's okay to take a break from that. But so many of them, they want to take care of each other because they come from similar backgrounds and similar experiences. So it's wonderful when you see that when that happened. It reminds me of a story. My wife's a middle school teacher, and she speaks enough Spanish to fake it till she makes it. But she tells a story of a new kid that came in fresh from another country, spoke not a lick of English, and the first day, like, they get up, they line up, they go to the cafeteria. He had no idea. The poor child had no idea what was going on, and she turned around and he was missing in line, and she came back and he was sitting there crying in class, and was able to communicate. He's like, we're going to lunch. And then she's seeing the child, 2 and 3 years later, who speaks English as well as anybody else. So just creating that environment to where they feel like they're comfortable, they're at least comfortable, and then working through all the struggles to access the education and learn to be successful. Awesome.
I've utilized Google Translate a lot, even though it's not 100% accurate. It's accurate enough to get the point across, because my parents will sometimes use it too to communicate with me, and then I'll communicate back with them. And but I know enough words to, a lot of times, like if we're doing a this or that type exercise, I'll usually look up one key word that I could say in Spanish, because Spanish is our big one, besides Arabic. And I'll also get my Spanish EA, who helps out with our ESL kids. Usually give her quite a bit of time to translate my worksheets and things. And I even had her do a whole individual set of individual lessons that I was doing with a kid who he spoke English, but his grandparents did not. And I wanted to make sure grandparents understood what was going on, because they were very concerned about him.
We've talked a lot about our experience in working with English learners. Tell me a little bit about your experiences with and supporting students with disabilities, and that relationship that you have with your exceptional education, special education teachers.
One of our tiered support systems is our check-in, check-out program. And we, use our SPED teachers, especially if they're already identified as receiving SPED services, as well as our ELL teachers, to kind of assist in the creation of those behavioral goals and the tracking. So they're checking in with that person that they've already got a relationship with and checking out with them at the end of the day. But it also, carries over into the classroom, so the teacher is kind of supporting, and then I come in and evaluate the data points and meet with the student to, again, provide that wraparound approach of services in place at the school.
Definitely any child that has those adaptive behavior goals in their IEP, we can consult and collaborate with that, and during that process, that's awesome.
We have a math 1 teacher at our school that we try to put all the ELs with. We have a math 2 teacher that we try to put and the SPED teachers kind of do the same thing. Obviously they have more students, so they can't, it's usually 2, but yeah.
But each high school has a specialist in areas, or maybe it just depends?
Oh, I'm just saying our school has started doing that. Yeah, we just have like she was saying,
We'd love to have that too.
Yeah, it's Nona Hall funded the stipends for us. So maybe reach out to her and see how she got that taken care of. It's really cool.
So is that going to allow you to go into that specialist classroom to provide extra support in there? Because that's what I hear our teachers needing. When we did this collaborative thing toward the end of the year, where we kind of, as counselors, went to different groups and sat in. It was awesome. it was amazing. But that was one of the things that, like, my teachers, I was with a lot of the English teachers, and that's kind of what they wanted. We did have a teacher that I think would have been considered a specialist had we been doing that, because Mr. Gladish will go to her and be like, I need it. When we get our kids in the middle of the year, it's like he knows who his people are that he can go to and, ask these questions. But also, we have so many that I think they want something like that where they can have more support from the EL department when they have such a large group of EL students in their classrooms. But that would make that a lot easier for y'all to be able to do that. That's awesome.
Our administration, again, is really like special ed and ESL friendly, so I'm very thankful. Do you know Tamara Blair? She's incredible. And Dr. Blair, everyone loves both of them. So she's allowed us to I have an additional planning as department head, and that's time where I go and meet with PLCs. Like, I'll get an EA to cover my class once a month or something, and I'll go to PLCs once a month, and I'll go meet with the one specialist on that PLC to check in and see, like, hey, what are you doing next quarter or this quarter that you need help with? And it's hard because there's so many, we're so departmentalized and there's so many PLCs to visit, but as long as you're intentional about, like, knowing, like, hey, he's going to be there in March, I want to be able to show him this cool and it's cool because they'll know that I'm coming, and they'll be like, look at this thing I did, look, the kid responded, and they'll show me student work, because
that's wonderful.
It's worked out pretty well for us. Yeah, fingers crossed. So we also wanted to talk about, let me pull up my list of questions here again. Anyone else want to share successes that we've had this year?
I can share.
Yes.
I can't talk a lot about EL because we have a very small population at the school I'm currently at. But as regarding SPED, I feel like one of the good things that came out of the pandemic was that we shifted to having all of our 4-year plans virtual. And so that has helped with collaboration, specifically with our SPED teachers, because they in the past had been trying to create a 4-year plan for our students, and they try to, as case managers, they try to hold it all and do it all themselves, but they're not as knowledgeable necessarily as us on that. So we've collaborated a lot with our SPED department on educating them on the graduation requirements, but also giving them view-only privileges to the 4-year plan. Yes. So that way they can see their students' 4-year plans, and if they have questions, they can let us know, and they have them ahead of time prior to meetings and things like that. Something we've also worked out with our SPED teachers is, because we do have to go to so many meetings, is that they try to respect our time and plan the piece that the counselors are needed for, usually the transition and the high school planning piece, and we'll try to do that first, so that then we can leave the meeting if there's not any more questions for us. So that's been really nice too.
That is something that our counselors do when we go to 504 meetings. That's always encouraging to me, because a lot of sometimes you'll find counselors and like people who have been out of the classroom or have never been in the classroom. They're like, oh, it's a meeting and then it goes until this time. And I'm like, yeah, but you realize, like, I have a 30-minute planning today. And like, I would like to go back to my room for at least 5 minutes instead of bell to bell. So yeah, that's obviously amazing. I like that you brought up the 4-year plan, because I think some schools try to hold that close to their chest for their 504 and IEP students. And those of us that have dual serve kids, my first few years, I ran into so much with scheduling logistics of like I would reach out to the special education teacher and they'd be like, I don't know if I can share their IEP with you. It's like, I don't need to see their IEP, I just need to know what classes you want them in, how much do you see them, like what's your relationship like? And I have experienced counselors can be a huge bridge for that, because if I'm having trouble finding something, I mean, you have access to everything. You should have access to everything. And so I can come to you, or the special education caseload worker can come to you and say, hey, I need this kid's EL portfolio or whatever. So I think making yourselves available to your specialist teachers can be really helpful in our shoes, just from my perspective. Something else Dr. Clark wanted us to address. This is something we get a lot of feedback on in our EL collaborative, and I've been told you guys get a lot of feedback on in your counselors collaborative, is how to support our EL and SPED students transitioning from high school to post-secondary, or like from middle school to high school. You guys, anyone want to share successes in that area? I can share some if we need to get started.
For EL or for?
Either, yeah. The point of this is to talk about both. I'm sorry, I can only bring one perspective to the table here.
You said from middle to high?
Yeah, middle to high school or high school to secondary, or yeah.
Yeah, I think we do a really good job bridging students from middle to high. So we have bridging meetings, and so the school counselor and administrator typically is there from the high school. And then we work to bridge the kids and pick out their classes during those bridging meetings.
Yes.
So that works really well.
And they have that one-on-one connection.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And we do 4-year plan and everything like we would any other student. So, yeah.
That's really cool. We do something similar at Riverdale, and my understanding is that y'all do the same thing in most of the other Rutherford County high schools, where we go to the middle schools and register students. I would encourage y'all to invite your SPED and ESL leads to come with you. The amount of times, my first few years in this position, I didn't go to those bridging meetings in the 8th grades and at other high schools when we rezoned. I was at your school a few weeks ago, like before the end of school, because we're getting a bunch of your kids. But like, no, they seem sweet. Just we're overloaded. But like inviting your SPED and ESL teachers to those meetings, because I can't tell you the amount of times that like kids will email me or message me over the summer and say like, oh my gosh, it was so good to know that there's like more than one person I can go find. So like your kids that are dual served that have specific needs and have specific anxieties about high school, not just like, oh, am I gonna have friends, am I gonna like my classes? They have anxieties about like, will I be able to read the signs? Will I be able to, will I be in too small of a reading intervention class? Like they have specific anxieties about high school that like no one's addressing with them, and having like other people at those meetings with them in their 8th grade really helps ease that anxiety.
Yeah, I feel like special education and school counselors, they should be like the best of friends.
Yeah, for real.
It really should be. And then working with parents too, and tag teaming with parents, because that's a huge barrier. Even at the high school level, that was always to me a barrier, because parents just didn't understand a lot of the language. I feel like sometimes our teachers overspoke or used language they just couldn't understand.
Right, that's right. Talked over their heads.
Yes, and I'm like, can we just bring this down?
That's right. We're all on the same team.
Yes.
You know, we're all trying to help this person
and
right
you need
here.
to hear their input, and don't, because I want parent input. I always wanted parent input, but some people, I've worked at low performing, mostly minority schools, and it's like it was a benefit to them because they could talk over them and not truly have to explain things. And I was like, that's not right. That's not right. No, it's not. And it's just it's a disservice.
It's using your position.
Yep. And it's not helping the kid at all. It's not kid centered at all. So, working with parents, that's something that's always been important to me. So, what are some strategies I guess y'all have used in working with parents when it comes to special education?
Just keeping that line of communication open with them.
Or getting them to come to meetings.
And getting them to come to meetings. And
did Zoom, now with COVID, did Zoom help with that any, with increasing participation with meetings?
Yes. Yes.
I hope people keep that.
I am. Because, I mean, and another thing, when I schedule, I use Google Voice on my computer, and I text the parents. Get it. Instantaneous answer.
Yes,
you can call, email, you don't get a response, but when you text, they immediately text back. So I told all my coworkers, I said, y'all use that Google Voice and text them. You can do it right from your computer.
See, I didn't do it from my computer, but I kept a Google phone number as a school counselor so that I could keep in contact with parents, because like you say, you can send text messages and phone calls and they would respond so quick. Oh my gosh, that's good.
Oh, there's my big takeaway right there.
Oh wait, I think we're supposed to be writing this stuff down. We'll get to it. I know, right? That's really good. That's really good. Well, I thought Zoom would work really well.
Yeah, and because whenever I schedule my 504s, I give the parents, I say, would you like in person or Zoom? They're like, some parents are like, oh, I don't like that Zoom, I'm coming in. I'm like, okay. And then some of them was like, nope, Zoom. So some of them are literally at work, and they have their phones and they're still working.
It makes it so convenient for them that are on the jobs, they can't leave.
But then you're asking yourself, are they really paying attention?
Right. Well, I try to schedule it around their lunch time, or for some of the parents that are educators during their planning, and then we'll do it then. So it makes it nice. It's very convenient.
Well, see, mine, the way our schedule is, 6th grade, there are 2 related arts periods. 6th grade is in the 1st and 2nd. 7th is 3rd and 4th, and then 8th grade is 5th and 6th. So all my meetings are at the end of the day. So that's the only time I can do it.
Yeah, that's the only time. So they can't do it when it's convenient for them. You have to do it when it's convenient for you. Yeah.
Right. I like that.
Oh, that's interesting. Any other ideas?
I just say collaborate. That's all you can do.
Yes.
Is keep that line of communication open with your people. Sometimes it's hard because I ask questions, some people get irritated with me. But I'm like, I want to know.
I can't help you if I don't know.
The more informed I am, the better I can perform to help you, the child.
That's hard, building trust, because it's a trust thing too.
I think that's the key right there, that trust, and that they know that you're that person that's in that building that's got their kids back, that you're there to help them and you're there to help that kid.
Especially with EL kids, their parents are they don't want to sign nothing. They're scared that...
They're scared.
They're scared, yeah. They're scared that somebody's going to take their kids away or report them, and I dealt with that when our previous president got elected. 300 of our Latino kids didn't show up for school for about 2.5 weeks.
Wow.
Because they were scared. I was at a very rural school, and they were terrified. And what do you do? I get it. What do you do?
Have you ever been written into an IEP without your knowledge?
Well, we've had out-of-state transfers because it's a state thing. So we've had out-of-states, and then we've had to have our meeting within the 10 days of them coming, and not necessarily saying, okay, you're not having this, but they may get contract counseling. But as far as school counselors being written in specifically, no. And if it has been in the plan, then we readdress as a team of how we're going to meet that. But it won't be necessarily services through me.
I know that with check-in and check-out, we'll say a lot of times with a trusted adult. And it may be us that does the check-in, check-out, but my fear is that, because I'm not invited to our IEP meetings, just because, one, my grade band doesn't have a whole bunch of IEPs anyway, but with the older grades, I'm very afraid to have the counselor specifically written in so that if either one of us or both of us aren't there that day, we're not in violation of their IEP.
I would get in touch with your team as far as your SPED team so that you can have that conversation and that they are familiar that you shouldn't be written in, because we are never in the same place every day. We just are not. It just does not happen, even with our best intentions. And I think that's a lot of, if you're absent or something, if it's in the plan, they have to follow the plan. So it gets very dangerous. So I would address that with your team just so that they know if you aren't invited to the IEPs. I'm not either. I'm 504 coordinator. I think that's a barrier too, is that if I've identified the student and then we've gone 504 route, I'm involved in that whole process, but if it goes to an IEP, I'm not in those meetings often. Very rarely will I be in a meeting unless I'm working directly already with that student because I helped identify.
So finding a way to number one, find those times to consult and collaborate with our exceptional ed teachers. Number one, to let them know what is appropriate and what is right as far as service model and service provider within the IEP when it comes to the need for adaptive behavior skills and goals and addressing those. And I agree with all of you. no 2 days are alike, no 2 hours are the same for a school counselor. So I think it puts the school at a disadvantage, it puts the student at a disadvantage, and it puts us in danger of getting into those legal ramifications of not providing appropriate services that are outlined in what is a legal document in the IEP. So I think that's where working with your case managers, but also them consulting with their district level leadership, right? And if you have a school counselor leader at the district level, having those collaborations so that everybody's speaking the same language, right? And ensuring that we're not putting ourselves in the crosshairs legally, but also we're doing what's right for students.
And assuring like the parents that we are still going to see those students as a school counselor. We're not saying, oh, we're not going to see them. It's just we're not going to be a part of the plan. It may not be every, twice a week or whatever. It's going to look different.
Yeah. I was going to say too, like when we do our SAT meetings, usually somebody will bring up if a student really needs social emotional education in some way, it comes up usually during that meeting. And my little spiel is always, I service every student in this school. Your kid already has access to me, and I'm not running into the IEP plans because if I'm imminently needed for a crisis, I cannot guarantee I'll see your kid that day. But if you feel like they need scheduled counseling, I can provide you with a list of resources and you can set that up outside of here. And then and there have been several times it's been my SPED teacher, right, who will say, well, what can you see them for counseling? I'm happy to check in, is usually what I say. I'm happy to see them when I can.
Well, and when you think about it, school counseling is a general education service.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a special education service. And at best, our model for small group or individual is brief short-term counseling. We're not long-term therapists, right? And when you're thinking about the needs that get written into an IEP, then it's not appropriate, and at the very least it's inappropriate, and at the worst it can be detrimental and have legal implications if we are. So I think the way that y'all have described how you handle having those, not saying no, but diverting the conversation in the appropriate direction is the best way to kind of handle those conversations.
I do want to ask y'all something in that vein that Dr. Wilson and I were talking about is when you are reaching out to schedule your dual serve students that need RTI and special ed, like they need inclusion classes and they need RTI, or if they need RTI, because we have kids who need RTI and DSL, especially in high school with Tier 3 reading, how do you go about scheduling those students?
We collaborate with those teachers,
Okay. I guess
We've had a lot of turnover in our SPED department since we opened, so that's every year we find we're having to recreate a process just because we opened a school when we shut down for 20, and then distance learning, and we've this is our third SPED lead this year in 4 years. So I feel like we're constantly trying to figure the best, we learn something every year about how to do it better, but then we're starting over with someone new every time. So we're kind of encroaching upon that, trying to figure out, okay, now how do we take what we've learned and do something better this year? But it is collaborative as much as we can be with having that much turnover.
We don't have a solid system.
No.
Right. We'll get there eventually.
But I think that's across the district, honestly.
Yeah.
It's not just y'all. It's really
That's
not.
good.
But it also comes from the district level, and I know being there, they are restructuring our district and really working on to meet all of our needs. So there will be a high school supervisor kind of for SPED that will kind of help us figure out and navigate all of the different, because we have with SPED,
we have no systems for it. In other districts, I know we're speaking to Rutherford, but yeah.
But they are working on that.
That's
good.
That's good.
Any of y'all that are from other districts, have you had success with like a streamlined way of communicating with people, or is it kind of like one-on-one conversations with teachers and caseload managers? It's pretty much it's the latter.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what it's been for us, and it works. We get it done, but it's sometimes there are students that I mean, I'm not even joking, y'all. 3 times during the summer I check all my kids' schedules. I take a day and I sit my 3 cups of coffee and I check all my kids' schedules because they and they fall through the cracks. And so it's hard from y'all's perspective to keep up with all of the moving parts. Yeah. So having better systems in place would definitely serve our kids that need multiple services. And not just those kids, but our high achievers who need, a CTE pathway and 2 AP classes, and they play a sport.
And we have talked about adding that indicator. So we use Skyward, but adding an indicator for RTI in Skyward also, because we have one for 504, we have one for, but teachers won't necessarily know if a student is in RTI.
Yeah.
But that indicator, and that would also help us with scheduling pieces, because we know, like, when we're balancing classes and things at the beginning of the year, to stay away from those kids. But if we're also thinking about students that are in RTI, that might help as well.
I know, because right now we're juggling 4 or 5 lists, and then you get to balancing.
Yeah.
That's right. And
And
so
you've moved people.
yeah, that's a good idea.
We've seen a lot of success with, how many of y'all have inclusion rosters when you're scheduling? We have EL inclusion rosters. And like no one had thought of that until like Dr. Tennyson and I were like, why don't we have that for our kids? Because then they won't get leveled when you level classes. And they were like, we can do that. I was like, yeah, you just put ESL after instead of INC. It's the same code. So that like was a game changer for us, because then our kids wouldn't get moved when they leveled and moved things around. So that was a success we've had the last few years.
All right, I think let's all turn your attention back up here now. Roaming around, I've heard some snatches of great conversation and some, this is good. I would like to hear what you're talking about. So group facilitator, Dr. Wilson and Andrew and Joe, I'd either like for one of you to share out or have some of your group. So one way or another, we'd like to hear, what did you talk about? Let's start by asking, what are some successes?
Got a lot of those.
Dr. Gordon or your group?
What were some of the successes? One of the general successes was just being mindful of and trying to do our best to utilize students' home languages, whether it be just learning how to say hi in different languages, or translating the materials that we're using so that students can participate. Someone mentioned in utilizing PowerPoints, being able to have a voiceover that's translated in students' languages. It may go fast, but they're able to at least pick up some of the content so that they can be an active participant. But also being able, those students then bringing their friends in that can speak English so that they can get the help from the school counselor. If nothing else, you're building relationships and making that student feel comfortable in the building.
Yeah. You know, using the PowerPoint, keep in mind that when you're learning a language, there's four ways we learn it, 4 pathways. We read it, we speak it, we hear it, and we write it. So any of those language pathways that can be used, you know, to improve communication there. But Dr. Gordon and elementary group, anything else? What else? Some successes?
We just talked about finding ways to work with students in a nonverbal fashion. So creating peace corners in a classroom, or having activities that we may not be communicating, but having sand trays in the office that students can come and utilize. If nothing else, even if we're not able to communicate and talk about feelings, we can help a student self-regulate through having those resources and materials in our offices. Yeah.
And those visuals are really important, right? The visuals of what is sad, the visuals of what's happy, what's angry, for young ones or older ones, either one. Anything else?
Covered most of it from the elementary.
What about problems? What about dilemmas in the elementary school?
One of the questions that was asked that I think generated a lot of conversation was whether school counselors should be specifically mentioned and added into an IEP service plan, or had that ever happened. And obviously the general consensus is that that's an inappropriate utilization of our services as school counselors. Our service model isn't aligned with the level of need that an IEP would suggest. We're a general education service. You know, we can provide student services to ESL students and students with disabilities, but having our school counselors, our name specifically, or school counselor in general, listed in the service plan for a student's IEP is inappropriate. But we talked about how to not say no, but to angle the conversation. We will definitely work with our child. Here's how we can support the goals of an IEP and not be listed as the service provider within an IEP. And I would just be curious at the other tiers because I've been erroneously written into an IEP before and had to backtrack with the case manager before, but I'd be interested if folks at other tiers have experienced that as well.
Middle, high. Comments on that? High school, comments on that?
We were just reacting to that as I had never heard of that happening before. I would never do, wow. Yeah.
And I've heard it happening all the time.
Yeah.
I'm sure some of my name is still in some IEPs. Because instead of just writing counselor, like they'd write your specific name.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I've actually, in an IEP meeting, my name was going to be written. I said no, because something can happen and I may not be here. Then you have to have another meeting to change it. So it should just say school counselor in general and be broad. That way, if I'm not available, they can see the other two school counselors that are there, you see? So it should be very, very broad. I would not put a name in somebody's IEP.
Okay, all right.
In my experience, in the service provider typically is going to be, in my experience, like those students who need those adaptive behavior goals within their IEP. And a lot of times we have some curriculums that are exceptional educators, special educators utilize, but I feel like I'm best served in a supplemental role to that more structured education that they receive to be able to work towards mastery of those behavior goals. But yeah, I just think of the legal ramifications of not being able to provide the service because of the varying nature of our days as school counselors. I just wouldn't want it to be a disservice to the student, but from a legal standpoint, I wouldn't want to get caught in that hot water as well.
Okay, interesting conversation there. Definitely a cross-collaborative conversation. Desiree, were there any, she's been monitoring receiving live stream comments. Were there comments in the elementary section on that? Anything related to that? Or what comments do you have?
I would say there's some, like, when it goes back to like the success and problems that some of the counselors have had. One says, it's worked best for me with special education when we collaborate on work systems, integration into the classroom with those systems, individual counseling for the student to help understand their needs. After talking to several friends that are special education teachers, one of my friends mentioned how much of a difference it makes to have the counselor in IEP meetings as an advocate for not only students, but also parents, as parents might need help understanding their rights.
Okay, so a role as an advocate and more than an actual component of the IEP requirement. Yeah, okay. Other comments from the elementary participants?
Another one that I believe is kind of a success is they said being present at registration and introducing myself to families, walking new families to their class allows them to build relationships at day one. And then another one says one thing they've noticed that works with our CDC class is working directly with special ed assistants. They are miracle workers and know their kids best. I will get with them and learn what works. That's not finished.
Okay. And I think we had a couple of dilemmas posed on that as well.
Yes, there is two dilemmas. One of them says, I have tried to invite, I think it means I try to get invites to the IP meetings, but that doesn't always happen. And then another one says they have had difficulty with the CDC and they're asking for any suggestions or resources that can help them improve in the future.
Okay, so getting invited to the IEP, being included in that conversation, and then any ideas on helping, working with CDC. Comments on that? Yes.
I'd like to know how many here are included in the IEP meetings.
How many in this room are included in the IEP meetings? Raise your hand high. Raise it high. Okay. There you go. Other dilemmas from this elementary conversation?
Well, one of the barriers that we had talked about is because even though we probably shouldn't, or no, we shouldn't, be in a related arts rotation, being in that rotation, whether it be full or whether it be partial, really puts barriers in for having time for that collaboration. Prevents the counselors from being able to go to those meetings because, well, when do those meetings happen? When the grade level teachers are at planning, and when are we in the rotation during those times? So it really puts a barrier in place. So you're needing to have multiple layers of advocacy. I want to advocate to be in the IEP meeting, but I really want to advocate to not be in the rotation. So it's two very large conversations.
Okay. All right. Other feedback, comments from our elementary people here?
I know the elementary was talking about what happens if like you're written into an IEP, and one of the virtual participants actually was asking, I don't know if it's the right time, but I know y'all were talking about it. So they asked if we are written into an IEP, should we get the special ed incentive pay?
Oh, any comments on that? Yes,
What I shared with our group is when we've had students transfer from out of state, they may have had that in their IEP. And so when they have that meeting, we'll sit down as a team and our social worker is there, and we'll talk about whether it be contract counseling or, they would still have access to the school counselor just in a different capacity. But if we do need to connect them to other resources, but contract counseling is usually what we'll look at for that component if we have like an out-of-state transfer where they're requiring it's in there. But sometimes, we'll sit down at the table and the parents are like, well, no, we really just think just seeing the school counselor as needed is best. So it's really about having that communication with the parents and the team as a whole is what's really best, just like any other accommodation or service.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, want to add to it?
And one thing that somebody else in the group brought up, and one thing that Joe said is, by nature, school counselors are short-term, brief, solution-focused, and that long-term, IEP goals are long-term. And so that is in opposition to what our focus is, and so that's when we can refer out to an outside party for services.
Okay. Any other remarks? Yes, on the special incentive pay. Special education incentive pay. Okay. Any other remarks from elementary? All right. Let's move to middle school right here. Dr. Wilson. And I'm going to borrow this agenda from you just a moment. Dr. Wilson? So middle school successes, let's start. What are some things that have worked with these practitioners in middle school?
For our ELL students, I know for my school specifically, that helps is we are on teams in our grade levels. So when ELL students come in, they are paired with other ELL students in those same classes. And then during their related arts classes, they have their ELL time. So that we have an ELL teacher, and then we have an ELL educational assistant, and she follows them around all day. So they're getting services throughout the day. As far as our special ed, we all agreed that we have good relationships with our SPED team. My school, we have a whole team, like it's the SPED manager and then all of the case managers throughout the grade level. So collaboration. That's what we talked about.
And school counselors collaborative. Well, I'll just throw that in.
I don't know if you guys utilize this tool, but during COVID, it became a very good tool for me, Google Voice. If you cannot get parents to answer the phone, you don't have to use your own phone. Get a Google Voice account, it's free, and text them from your computer, and they will answer right away and get those meetings scheduled. So yeah, that was one thing we did talk about.
Yes, okay. All right. Any other successes from the middle school conversation?
Oh, and we for meetings we utilize Zoom. I give the parents for 504s and S teams, I say, do you want in person or Zoom? And you could tell the ones that don't like technology, oh, no, I don't like that Zoom. I'm going to come in. Okay, that's fine. But then some parents, another thing is like we have access now because of Zoom. A lot of times we think COVID has set us back, but sometimes you got to think about the successes from COVID, and having Zoom meetings have opened up the door to communicate and keep parents involved with those aspects.
Yes, I agree. Glass is half full, glass is half empty, right? What are some barriers that you've encountered in middle school? Some barriers that you would like to throw out here or perhaps address in future sessions? Barriers in middle school, working with English learners, working with children with special needs. Yes.
One of the barriers that we discussed was also just the translation with our students who speak Spanish, especially was one of the main languages that was a challenge, and not having anyone that can communicate with them in a way that preserves confidentiality. So, that's kind of an ethical question of, what do we do? This child's hurting, they're crying, they're upset, and they need to talk, but we can't really get past hola, So that was a real concern, a real barrier.
Okay. Yes. I urge you to take some time and log on and watch some of our sessions from ELL, because we address some of these questions. We've had quite a lot of different suggestions on translation, because different districts, different levels of fluency in the community, and translation resources. Take a look at some of our videos on our website. Middle school, anything else?
I would say just my experience at high school level, bibliotherapy is very useful and helpful when working with EL students. Okay. And so I would strongly recommend that approach when working with EL students.
All right, great idea. Desiree, any comments from middle school online?
I shared some with the middle school group earlier, but there is currently no additional ones.
Okay, all right. Let's move to high school. We've got about 7 more minutes in this session today. So Andrew, successes in the high school with school counselors working with English learners and special needs students.
We talked about bridging the gap for our high school students, both coming up from middle school, helping ease that anxiety and going out into the world, whether it's into vocational fields or into a college readiness path. We talked about how we can go to middle schools as counselors, as SPED teachers, as ESL teachers, and help facilitate that transition for students by helping them select classes and seeing what they're interested in, connecting them with people at the high school level. We also talked about how we can celebrate all paths students take out of high school. We talked about events we do where we have not only having college fairs, but having trade fairs. That's the name we talked about, trade? Something like that, vocational.
Trade technical. I don't know what the name is going to be, but yes.
I love it. Williamson County's on top of it. So we talked about some of those ways to help students transition and feel like whatever path they're taking post-secondary is valid, and they should be excited about the future for them, whether or not they're going to college. We talked about communication between your counselor and your SPED, EL, RTI teachers, and how you as counselors having access to all the information on these students can be a bridge for those teachers, and how, from the teacher's perspective, if I can't get a hold of that SPED caseload manager, I need information on a student, after 3 days I'm going straight to the counselor. I'm like walking in her office going, hi, what can you tell me about this kid? I need to figure this out. So making yourself available to those specialty teachers who need you as a resource can be a huge deal. We talked about providing options. We talked about scheduling a lot. Scheduling is a beast, especially for high school. I know it is for middle school as well. We talked about providing honors, AP, advanced honors, specialized CTE options for your SPED students, your ESL students, your RTI students, who are often overlooked for those opportunities because it's presumed based on some piece of data that they cannot perform at that level or they cannot achieve that, when simply we know that not to be the case. I'm speaking to a very empathetic group here, and I have a very empathetic group over here who sees the potential in those students. So we talked about not writing those students out immediately because of their status within a certain program. We also talked about counselors doing lessons with the students. I know in elementary school this is a lot more common for SEL lessons and stuff, at least from what I've heard. In high school, that's not something that's very common, sadly, is counselors doing SEL lessons. So we talked about the benefits of that, especially for your groups like your ELs and your SPED students who have specific needs throughout their school day and throughout their lives. They give them anxieties at school. We also talked about those bridge meetings. We talked about 4-year plans. My Williamson County friend shared about how they shared their 4-year plans with everyone involved in that student. So a counselor developing a 4-year plan for a student is not just for that counselor to schedule them, it's also for the SPED teacher who has to help that student. It's also for the teachers as necessary. And so the way that we share information is very important for your classroom teachers. Don't hold all of your truths about the student to yourself. What other positive things we talk about? We talked about expanding, we talked about some mechanical things with scheduling that I don't know how interested all of y'all are in. We talked about skyward indicators and scheduling things that would help us make sure all of our students, especially our dual serve, SPED and RTI, or RTI and ESL, or EL and SPED students got served. Yeah. Ooh, that was a lot. We had a lot of successes, y'all. I hope that was true with y'all's groups too. I heard a lot of positive affirmations and nodding heads at each other whenever I turned around.
Do you have 1 or 2 compelling barriers in 3 minutes?
Yeah. So we talked about one of the biggest barriers we talked about, a general umbrella term, I would say, is communication, right? Getting students to feel comfortable coming into the office, getting them to check their email, getting them to respond to you. We're trying to teach our students autonomy in high school, and so getting them to take kind of advocacy for themselves, like, I need to go see the counselor, or I need to fill out this form to progress in my FAFSA, that kind of stuff. We also talked about how do we find and best use the teachers in our school that can support those students, because you as the counselor are centered in your office, and yes, you go to class, but those teachers and those EAs, educational assistants, are the ones that are in the classroom with them. And so how do you find those teachers that already care about your SPED students or already care about your ELs, and how can you support them in supporting those students in the day-to-day life, instead of you feeling like you have to do all of it for them from your office and from the visits to the classroom? Yeah.
And I think we've already covered high school comments from the live stream chat. Desiree, do we have any more? No. Okay.
One of the successes on here, one of our participants said that they had success in working with IEP case managers and EL teachers to develop schedules. And then some issues that the participants had is issues in making sure EL and IEP students receive accommodations, classes, supports they need, and also meet graduation requirements. Another one said, I had issues with school counselors expected to sign as the teacher at an IEP meeting so that they did not have to pull a teacher. Thankfully, that has been addressed and is no longer happening. And then we have another one that said their friend, a high school special education teacher, mentioned that he wishes that his counselors had more collaborative relationships with special ed teachers and students.
Okay. This cross-collaborative conversation is important because it can bridge so many it could bridge the silos in our schools. If we tend to work, you know, without collaboration, this is an important conversation. I want to say, if you'll check our website, Andrew has a cross-collaborative session with his former high school counselor, and it's a good one. So we're going to wrap this session up now, and we're going to take a 10-minute break. I will ask that when you come back in the room, you are seated and ready to go at 2:20, and that's 10 minutes from now. You can sit wherever you'd like for the final session. Thanks for your participation. Let's take a break. 10 minutes, 2:20. We'll be back online.